So many Steam vents being played. Just Kai Control makes magic super lame. Monday, meta Monday. Monday, meta Monday. How you doing, folks? Good morning. Happy Monday. Welcome to a new week. We've got a bunch of data to dig into from the weekend. So we're kicking off this morning with our Meta Monday breakdown. And this week's breakdown feels like one of those breakdowns that's kind of super validating to me personally as kind of player and game theorist, because looking at the metrics here that we have from the Strixhaven Championships that's happened over this weekend, they really feel like they match what my gut instincts were in terms of a number of things in the formats. Let's talk about what my gut instincts were and why I think these metrics kind of validate them or show the same thing that I thought was true about the format. So, to start, for people that didn't follow, the Strixhaven Championship was a 500 player split standard historic event that happened over the weekend. We are looking at just the historic matches. Those are pulled out separate from the standard ones. And things to note here that I think are interesting in this data. First, looking at this column here, you'll notice something. There are 3 decks that broke 50% as a win rate. Just Kai Control, Just Kai Turns, and Is It Phoenix. All 3 of those decks are Steam Vents decks, and they are Brainstorm decks, and they are almost all expressive iteration decks. There's some variation in the Just Kai Turns list. Some played none, some only played 2 copies, but Just Kai Control and Is It Phoenix were mostly on 4 Brainstorm for expressive iteration, and Just Kai Turns was on mostly 4 Brainstorm and then 0 to 2 expressive iteration. So it's definitely a Steam Vents format, and we are living in it. I think you could also say it's a Brainstorm format, and we're living in it. So I was definitely someone who was cautiously optimistic that Brainstorm was perhaps going to be an okay power level for this format. You know, we only have Fabled Passage as a shuffle effect, but I think as this format's developed more, I think we're seeing that that's probably not the case. Brainstorm's probably a card that's a little bit too powerful for what's going on in Historic. And I think that a lot of people have been gloating like, I told you Brainstorm was going to be too good in Historic. Every idiot would have known that. When the reality is, if you look at these Brainstorm decks, I think a big part of what has helped Brainstorm get over the top in these decks is actually new cards. So expressive iteration, I'm going to pull that one up just in case people at home don't know what we're talking about, but expressive iteration is a brand new card that actually helps clear Brainstorm and provide powerful card selection as well. So I think it's really unfair and unreasonable to say we should have known Brainstorm was going to be too good in this format, because part of what has helped push it over the top was expressive iteration. So past that, what are other metrics that we can look at here that are interesting? Well, to start, you look at the total win rate here with Is It Phoenix, and you say, 52%, that's not bad. And then you look into some of the details, right? And you see the first thing you want to notice is that Is It Phoenix's win rate against Just Kai Turns was really bad. And while Phoenix at 35% was the most played deck in the field, Just Kai Turns was the second most played deck in the field, right? And I think that this win rate against not only Phoenix, but also against Junfood and Just Kai Control is definitely why we saw one of the biggest teams and some of the best Magic players on it bring Just Kai Turns. And if you look back at my clips from last week, there's clips of me saying I think Just Kai Turns is the best combo deck in the format, and I think that definitely lives up to it here. But a deck is more than just one matchup, right? If you look at Is It Phoenix past Just Kai Turns, you see that it's good against basically every other good deck in the format. It's not until we get down to this other category here at the very end that we see Is It Phoenix have another matchup under 50%. And this has been representative of my experience on the ladder too. A lot of, and I've heard this from other people as well, that they feel like Is It Phoenix isn't a problem because lots of random decks tend to have okay matchups against it because there are good tools for fighting Is It Phoenix in the format. It's just these decks largely don't have access to them and aren't playing them. And it brings up an interesting point, right? So like there's a question I had posted on Twitter a while back, a couple weeks at this point, was if a deck has it's actually almost exactly this. If a deck has a close to 50% win rate, but it has a lot of other polarizing matchups, is that deck and that format in a healthy spot? And I think I'd be inclined to answer no to that question. That if you have that kind of extreme matchup polarization, it's really not good for things. Speaking of matchup polarization, Jeskai turns here just incredible rates across the board. It's got a coin flip here against Selesnik, which honestly, this is one where you have to, one thing to note here on this matchup matrix, for people that aren't super familiar with how this is presented, you have these ranges underneath here, which these are basically your intervals based on what their sample size is. So based on the data, this is the actual observed win rate. But given the size of the sample that they have for each of these individual squares, they're only like 95. We have a point confidence interval 0.95 win rates don't include mirror matches. So yeah, so there's a chance that over larger sample size, that's actually somewhere between 26 and 75. Like that's a big range, right? So like there's a chance that this is actually worse than 50%. There's a chance that it's also better. And anecdotally, having experienced this company deck, I would be kind of surprised if Jeskai Turns is actually a coin flip here. Something else to consider that you have to take into an asterisk with a event like the Strixhaven Championship is that the Jeskai Turns deck was largely played by some of the best Magic players in that tournament, right? Like Hall of Famers, MPL members, people like that all chose to register Jeskai Turns, which means I would expect these rates to be inflated a little bit across the board. But like, even if we said, okay, let's shave 5% off of this, 5% off of this, assume it's this lower bound of 56%, 56% is still an overperformance for sure. Sliding down into the third Brainstorm deck of the farm, we'll skip Jund Food for a second. Jeskai Control had an only okay win rate here, powered largely by the fact that it had both a mediocre Is It Phoenix matchup and a mediocre Jeskai Turns matchup. And this, on Friday, when we looked at the initial metagame for this tournament, I mentioned how I was surprised that there was so little Jeskai Control. And seeing how these matchups played out, I'm no longer surprised by that. It looks like the people who chose not to play Jeskai Control made good decisions in doing so, probably having had experience with these matchups here and knew that these decks would be popular and they didn't want to play their deck into one of the harder matchups in the format. That being said, kind of the inverse of Is It Phoenix is something that's also been my experience on the ladder is that Gandalf Control chat, Jeskai Control here, it dumps the other category. If people who watch my regular gameplay content, you know that we frequently play decks. I'm just like, nah, I don't feel like playing against Jeskai. I'm just going to concede this matchup. And like, Jeskai Control, like, shoves random brews in a trash can. And it's definitely reflected here in the data as well, that the random decks that you played against ended up trash can adjacent. Similarly, something that I've talked about on stream with some frequency is that Jund Food being pushed down out of the format a bit with the introduction of Strixhaven, I think was one of the best things to happen to Historic since I started playing it, because Jund Food trash cans the other category even worse than Jeskai does, If you haven't played against Jund Food is so good against small creature decks looking to play Thoughtseize and Knights of the Ebon Legion and stuff like that. Little creature decks that play to the board just get decimated by Jund Food with some frequency. And this is, yeah. And one of the other things to note here is that outside of this other matchup, these ranges on these are huge. I'm actually, if I'm being honest, I'm actually kind of surprised they did a whole win rate matrix like this, because something to keep in mind when you're looking at this is these ranges are massive, right? Like this says 50% against mono black aggro, but again, Jund Food largely dumpsters these small creature decks. And I would be incredibly surprised if you made this matchup sample size larger if this wasn't closer to the 15% than the 85% based on my experience playing against this deck and with the mono black deck and decks like it against Jund Food. So this 50%, I would be surprised if it's accurate. Honestly, even these ones with like Izzet Phoenix, right? Like even these ranges are like pretty wide. And once you get past Jeskai turns, like these number of matches we have in here is like really, really small. You think Jund Company would fare better than Jund Food in the current format? I don't know. I don't have enough experience with the range of those matchups to really know. Yeah, like right, like this is 0%, but the confidence interval is 0 to 69%. Nice. That like it's not like basically you should likely the other category is so many decks that you could kind of look at this. But outside of this other category down here on the right, you should probably just ignore all of these values in the middle because they're just so few samples, right? So some of them we could take a peek at here. Like one observation that I think is really interesting, and we have some amount of confidence here because it was played against a deck that was really popular, is Jeskai Magma Opus actually has a really decent Jeskai turns matchup, which I think is important to note, right? Like we look at Jeskai control and it's 33%, 13 to 53 on the really low. Even on the high end, it's only okay. And this one, the bottom bound at 55% is higher than the top bound here. And this, I think the people that registered Jeskai control but played Magma Opus, those are the people that really understood what they should have expected going into the metagame for this tournament. These were people that they played their matchups and they knew what improved it. Even against Izzet Phoenix, right? Like they weren't necessarily good against it, but they were better than what stock Jeskai control was, because having those Magma Opuses and those Torrential Gearhulks really helps move that. And in fact, over the weekend, I updated my recommended Jeskai control list on my website to have the Magma Opus variation. Because I think as long as Jeskai turns and Izzet Phoenix are around, this is the Jeskai control variation you would like to be playing. Even though it's a little bit less represented here, I would expect to see more of this and less of this on tournament settings moving forward. Now, one thing to comment on, I've talked about how Jeskai Turns was brought by a big team. So like, is this a fluke? Was this 60% win rate just some of the best players in the world beating up they're good players, but still probably a little bit lower class player than them? We also had other tournaments this weekend that we can look at. We can look at some metrics from. So we had what was called the Pizza Box Open that had how many players? I think it was 70 something. This graphic is great. Yeah, there were 71 players in this, and we see kind of similar repeated metrics here from the championship. And these are just, an open entry tournament. We have Jeskai Turns having a really decent win rate, and we have Jeskai Control and Izzet Phoenix kind of underperforming. Insight Esports had a $5,000 cash prize open tournament. Jeskai Turns was the most represented deck in this field, and it again posted a strong win rate in an open entry tournament with just miscellaneous people picking up the deck. Jeskai Control struggled again. Izzet Phoenix had a better tournament in this one than the other one. The other one looked at it. Again, these sample sizes are small individually, but we can see a trend here, right? We have Jeskai Turns overperforming here with the best players in the world playing it, but we also have it overperforming in both of these smaller tournaments as well. And this was I think this one only had like 30 or 40 people in it, 31 people. But again, Jeskai Turns putting up a very strong win rate in a third separate open entry tournament. So, conclusions. What does this mean what does this mean for Historic as a format? Well, first, it means you better have a plan for Jeskai turns. I think that this is obviously going to become the stock best combo deck moving forward. That being said, I've talked about on stream a number of times where I think the core of the combo plan in that the Jeskai Turns deck is executing is actually an incredibly healthy combo for the format. Jeskai Turns, you can interact with it with counter spells, discard spells, removal spells are good against it. You can kill Velocamiss, you can kill the artifact that they're targeting, you can kill the 1/1 dwarf that they're targeting. So the turns deck overall gives a lot of avenues of interaction. So I would be very upset if they were to make a change to the format to get rid of that deck in its entirety. Like, I don't think we'll see, like, a Velocamiss or an Indomitable creativity ban. I think those would be out of bounds. That being said, I think any reasonable person will look at the metrics that we've seen this week and the previous week. So you can go back and look at the last 2 weeks worth of Meta Mondays. We've been doing this every week, and this is not a fluke that the Steam Vents decks have overperformed. Whether it's Is It Phoenix or Jeskai Control or Jeskai Turns, the Brainstorm Steam Vents decks have been putting up big numbers since Thassa's Oracle was removed from the format. And I don't think that is going to change without removing a piece from them. And I don't think that any of the individual core pieces of these decks should be removed. But I think making them less consistent would be ideal. Remember, these decks are a sum of their parts. And while things like Memory Lapse and Lightning Helix are really good, strong cards, with so many pieces of powerful selection like Brainstorm and Expressive Iteration, they just get to those powerful cards more consistently. And honestly, if I was in charge of Historic, I would suspend, honestly, probably both Brainstorm and Expressive Iteration and see where things end up with after a couple of weeks. And if removing both of those cards makes the Steam Vents decks too weak and not competitive, I would give one of them back. But I think I would start by pulling both out and see where things go. And part of the reason why I say that is, in my opinion, when formats hit this kind of critical mass of card selection, the games get less interesting, right? Because the games get very samey when people are able to execute finding their key cards so consistently every game, right? Like, there's less variety in win conditions people play because they just get to the best one more often when they have the selection. Same thing with answers, right? Like, I don't need to play more removal spells than just Lightning Helix because I'm going to find my Lightning Helix when I need it because I have so many powerful pieces of card selection. I'm going to find my Memory Lapses to protect my Teferi Hero of Dominarias because I have so much selection. So yeah, at any rate, this was a fun week. We had a lot of sweet metrics to break down. Thanks everybody for watching. If you're watching this on YouTube in the future, you can check out the past weeks of Meta Mondays. I'm here doing this every week. If you want to catch it live, it's the start of my Twitch channel. Thanks everybody for being here live this morning. We had almost 800 people in here, which is great because we haven't even been live for half an hour yet. So if you missed this from the start, I'm going to start uploading it to YouTube right now, and it'll be processed and published momentarily. So let's